Right, well, last time we finished with the account concerning Moses. It only went as far as in verse 29, and passing through the Red Sea. There were, of course, another 40 years involving Moses through the wilderness wanderings after that, but that's bypassed. And as we know, Moses didn't enter the promised land. He died before entering, and the mantle of leadership or authority was placed on Joshua, and he was the one to lead Israel into the promised land. It's sometimes pointed out that there could be a sort of a type or a foreshadow involved there. Moses was the lawgiver. Moses represented the law. And in reality, the law couldn't take a person into the promised land. I mean, the real promised land, the eternal inheritance, for the simple reason that nobody could keep the law. And transgression of the law, of course, was sin, which resulted in death. But Joshua, or Yahshua, which is the name of Jesus, he was the one that led them into the land, pointing forward, of course, to the Messiah, whose name was Yahshua. And, of course, they entered the land to conquer the Canaanites. We know the Canaanites had a lot of cities in the promised land. The spies had been sent out previously by Moses to spy out the land, and they came back with these negative reports about how tall these Canaanites were, and how high the fortification walls of the cities were, to the point that, that 10 of them, 10 of the 12, had a totally negative reaction and felt it was impossible. They left God out of the equation, and they felt it was impossible to conquer the land, and they poisoned the minds of the people. They were the cause of the spirit of unbelief pervading the whole nation, really. And as a result, God said, well, if that's the case, if you don't think you can make it under my power, then you can stay in the desert. And that's where they all stayed, and that's where they all died. And Joshua and Caleb were the only ones of that generation. But of course, the new generation coming on that were not held responsible for that unbelief, they were the ones that Joshua was to lead into the promised land. And from a human point of view, from a natural point of view, it was from all accounts of how powerful the Canaanites appeared to be. I mean, they were well entrenched in the land. They'd been there a long time. And from all accounts, it would appear humanly impossible to disinherit them, to actually defeat them. The Canaanites, they had chariots, and they had horsemen, and they had all, they had all the trimmings of warfare. But Joshua and Caleb, the men of faith that they were not daunted, because they knew God was able to do exceedingly abundantly above what you can ask or think. And they knew that the first city of the Canaanites that was to be conquered was Jericho. And Jericho was, as you know, the Israelites crossed the River Jordan, which stopped flowing to let them across. And Jericho wasn't that far from the River Jordan. And so that was to be the first fruits, as it were, of their victories over the Canaanites. And verse 30, which we're up to on the screen, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. You've all read the account, some of you many times. It's in Joshua chapter 6, and we read there that all the men of war, the whole army of Israel, in fact, were asked by God through Joshua to walk around the city once every day for 6 days. That's what they were to do, just to walk around the city for 6 days. And the priests probably 4 of them were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which well, Israel knew anyway, represented the presence of God. They carried it. They had poles that they carried it by, and the ark was covered. It was covered with a blue cloth, and I wouldn't be surprised if the inhabitants of Jericho, knowing the Israelites were on their way, they would be aware of them being encamped on the other side of Jordan, and they would be aware of the Jordan River being in flood, and they would be probably thinking themselves, well, how are they going to get across to attack us, you know? But then again, they were the Canaanites, not just Jericho and the whole land, they were aware of Israel's movements ever since they came out of Egypt. Even in those days, news travelled, and they would be aware of the judgments of God that fell upon Egypt. Egypt was the superpower of the day, and yet they were humbled by God. They would be aware of the Red Sea dividing, and Israel, you know, going through. And we do know from what we read about Rahab later, from what she said, that they knew about all this stuff, you know, that Israel had been doing. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had scouts on the lookout. You know, it was the way of it in those days. They wouldn't have all just been cooped up in the city of Jericho hoping for the best that the Israelites won't roll up. They'd have had scouts out there, and they would have scouts looking down on the River Jordan, being in flood, and they might be thinking to themselves, well, we did hear that their God actually parted the Red Sea, so I guess that wouldn't be that difficult for them to part the River Jordan. There'd be a breeze compared to parting the Red Sea, and they would be looking down and watching all this going past, and then at a certain point they see the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant and walking towards the River Jordan, which is in flood. And these priests carrying this ark walk up and virtually walk into the edge of the water. And lo and behold, the river stops flowing. Didn't divide like the Red Sea. The river actually stops flowing. And they think, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And so when the Israelites rolled up at the city of Jericho itself, and all the inhabitants are all locked in behind these big high walls protecting themselves, and then they see this Ark of the Covenant rolling up and starting to go around their city, they get the breeze up. They'd get the breeze up for sure. And I reckon, and I'll invite you to pass your own views on this, but I reckon God was playing psychology. He was playing psychological tricks on these people. Because you see, when the walls came down, it's generally accepted it was a divinely timed earthquake that caused the walls to fall down. And you say to yourself, well now, why the need to be walking around the city once every day for 6 days, and then on the 7th day walking around it 7 times? You know, that's 13 times they had to walk around this city. And the first 6 days they walked around, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and other priests there carrying trumpets, and they never blew them, they're just carrying these trumpets, not even blowing them. And then on the 7th time, when they walked around the city 7 times, they blew their trumpets. And you can imagine these people in the city of Jericho, what on earth are they doing? What on earth's going on there? But I reckon it would have really freaked them out. And I think they would know that something's happening, something's going on here. And I reckon that they were completely unnerved, so that when the time came that the walls of the city fell down, they were easy pickings. They'd been so intimidated, so psychologically damaged, if you know what I mean. They wouldn't have offered the resistance that they would under normal circumstances. And so there it was, 7 priests marched in front of the Ark of the Covenant, carrying the trumpets, not blowing them for the first 6 days, but on the 7th day, all of them, the whole army, and the Ark of the Covenant and all the priests walked around the city 7 times, during which the 7 priests blew their trumpets. And then at the end of the 7th circuit, the 7 priests were to sound one big, long, loud blast of their trumpet. And then when all the Israelites in the army heard it, they all, with one voice, they all gave a great big loud shout. And then the walls of the city came tumbling down. And that was how it happened. And I know that Garstang, a world-renowned archaeologist in his time, who was involved in one of the most major digs of the city of Jericho, he said that it was evident to him from what he could see, because they could still see the original walls and that of the city. He said they felt that the walls of the city fell outwards. They didn't fall inwards, they fell outwards. And he said it was evident to him that it was an earthquake that actually caused I remember one writer said, "Oh, it was the loud trumpets and the shout." Really? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it was a divinely timed earthquake that actually caused this to happen. But you know, from a natural point of view, it does all sound rather peculiar, don't you think? It does sound rather peculiar, and a lot of people would think, well, for goodness sake, Lord, you know, if you wanted to cause the walls to fall flat with an earthquake, why didn't you just do it? Why didn't you just tell the Israelites to march up to the city, stand at the side, and this cause the earthquake and cause the walls to fall flat? But he went through all this ritual, you know, as it were, and the only reason I can think is that it was psychological damage that God was causing, making it just that much easier when the battle took place, because the battle still had to take place. Because, like I say, the walls didn't fall inward and crush them all. The walls fell outward, so that all the people were still alive inside. Although I imagine some standing on the walls would have been affected. But you know, all the women and all the children and all the rest of them wouldn't have all been on the walls. They'd have all been inside the city. I mean, who ever heard of walls of a city collapsing because of trumpets being blown and because of people shouting out with a loud shout? But this divinely timed earthquake reminds you of the divinely timed earthquake that caused the landslide in the River Jordan to stop the river from flowing. Yeah. And God is in control of all things, and He's certainly in control of the earthquake. So Joshua clearly had faith in the Lord's instruction, and therefore implicitly obeyed them. But there's no record of him telling all the Israelites the exact procedure for the next week. And he may not have. I mean, he knew, he had to know, because God told him as the leader. But it's quite possible that the rest of the Israelites, you know, the whole army and all that, didn't know, didn't actually know what they were going to have to do. And it was a day-by-day thing. First day, he said, right, we're going to march around the city. You priests, you carry the trumpets, don't blow them, carry the ark, all right. And the next day, say, right, we're going to do the same again today, And then the third day, and they'd be thinking, really? How many days are we going to be doing this? Like I say, there's no record of him actually telling them all. And you could well imagine some Israelites maybe having reservations about all this and say, has he really heard from God? Or is this just his own idea? And from a natural point of view, it could seem a bit foolish, a bit like sprinkling the blood on the doorposts. As we've already discussed, how a lot of the things that God requires can seem foolish and not really make sense. Seem to be like unnecessary. And it may have been the case, on this occasion. So there it is. But being told on the seventh day to do what they had to do, and then the walls came tumbling down. Well, I guess that the penny dropped, and they could see what it was all about. And it illustrates, what Paul says: the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but divinely powerful for the demolishing of strongholds. And Jericho was certainly a stronghold, and it certainly got demolished, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord.
That whole campaign of Joshua's is just one big parable, isn't it? I know you've done a slide show on it, haven't you, Barry? Talking about how where that landslide happened to stop the River Jordan flowing was at a place called Adam.
That's right.
Which is the first man who sinned, and the one who's stepping in to the flow to stop it is Joshua, Yahshua, Jesus. It's rich with parable, how he steps into the flow of life and basically causes for sin, which gets stopped from Adam all the way down. He stops that sin, and then of course they enter into the promised land. And 6 days, and of course we know 6,000 years is going to be basically the earth's history of man wreaking his sin and everything. And on the seventh day, that's when they blew the trumpet. That's when Joshua got the victory.
Right.
And again, it's all a beautiful parable of the seventh millennium coming.
Yeah.
And it reminded me as well, when obviously on the seventh day they went around it 7 times. It reminded me in Leviticus 26 when God's giving the law to Israel, and he's warning them, if they sin, if they disobey, he'll punish them. And he uses the refrain quite often there, talking about, if they don't repent, he will punish them 7 times more for their sins. And so maybe that whole 7th day, of course, parabolically representing the 7th millennium, and that phrase in Leviticus where God's going to punish them 7 times more. It's like God saying, in the ultimate way, I'm going to punish you for your sin.
Right.
And of course, that's what Jesus is going to do when he comes. He's going to punish, to the ultimate, to those who deserve it, 7 times more, as it were, for their sin, as he establishes the kingdom, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's interesting in this verse we're looking at, though, because obviously it is the campaign of Joshua, but it doesn't mention him by name, does it?
No.
It just says the walls of Jericho fell down after they, compassed it about. And do you find that a bit curious, almost like we should notice that, especially in the light of, from memory, everything we've looked at up until now have been about specific people. And we have discussed that not every faithful person in the whole of the Bible is getting a mention here, because there's a lot more than what we read. But you would think Joshua is a pretty fundamental character in the whole plan of God, bringing them into the promised land, but he doesn't get a mention.
No.
And so obviously it begs the question, why? And then we're left to discuss that. So I would perhaps proffer a suggestion. The fact that Joshua, of course, represents the Joshua, Jesus himself, would it be a suggestion that he's deliberately not mentioned in a way of sort of like not taking any gloss off the ultimate Joshua, Jesus? Is there perhaps that's why he's not given a mention?
Just a thought.
I'd like to pick up, Barry, on when you were talking about them walking around and blowing the trumpets and the psychology of that. So obviously they were aware that they were going to get attacked, and this is what they were thinking. So they would be trying to work out which part of their armor, their walls, they're going to hit. And in the past, if someone had attacked a city with a high wall, they'd try and get through one narrow spot. And the people on the inside would bolster that area with
Right.
all their soldiers, and then you're just trying to get 5, 6, 10, 20 people through, getting slaughtered as you go. So there's definitely method in God's plan here. I don't know for sure if anybody on the Israelite side died, but I doubt it.
No.
With the walls coming down like that, most of the soldiers would have been on the wall.
Yeah.
And if not all of the soldiers, the best ones were the ones that were going to fire ammunition, arrows,
Right.
burning tar or whatever. They would have been on the walls.
Yeah.
And now I'm just picturing you've got this long procession going around, and because it's now been going for 7 times, it might have been elongated a little bit instead of in a bunch. So when the walls came down, they were actually able to attack from 360 degrees.
Yeah.
The inside troops that were left
Right.
had no idea. That's the way I look at that.
Yeah. Right. And it's not impossible that after walking around it a few times and nothing happening, those on the wall anyway might have reached some wrong conclusions and thought, oh, they don't know what to do.
Bunch of whack jobs.
They don't know what to do. They see how high these walls are, and they're demoralised. They're in a quandary. They're just going round in circles, getting nowhere. And it's not impossible that some on the wall might have actually started jeering, laughing at them, and taunting them like people probably did when they came up when Noah's building the ark. And started laughing at him. What an idiot,
And like people are going to do just before that 7th millennium ticks over in the end time. They're going to say, nothing's changed. You guys have been talking about Jesus. You guys have been marching around the city, all this time. Nothing's changed. You're useless. Your faith's useless. And then whammo.
Yeah. But this 7 times, not 5 times, not 6 times, 7 times. And it's interesting, just for a moment, to reflect on the times in Scripture
7.
where 7 times are actually mentioned. The first sort of reference to 7 is probably the creation account, where you got the six days that God worked, and the 7th was a rest, and it became the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. But I've got some old notes here where I obviously years ago sort of quickly looked at this, and it won't take long. And these wouldn't be all of them by any means, but you've got in Genesis 33 Jacob bowing 7 times to Esau, and you think, well, why 7? Why not 3 or 4? Or in Leviticus, we have quite a few references there in the ritual, the sacrificial ritual, sprinkling the blood 7 times for different reasons, sprinkling it sometimes before the altar or sprinkling it over the priest, or different sprinklings, but 7 times the sprinkling takes place. We read recently in our Proverbs 24, a righteous man falls 7 times and then he rises again. Psalm 12, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried and refined in a furnace 7 times. Elijah told his servant to go and look toward the sea for the advent of rain 7 times. 2 Kings 4 verse 35, Elisha stretched himself 7 times on a child who had died and wanting to bring him back to life again. Naaman was told to dip in the River Jordan 7 times. It's just this constant reference. Daniel 3 verse 19, the furnace was heated 7 times more than it was normally heated. 7 times hotter than hot. 7 times was to pass over Nebuchadnezzar because of his sin of pride and arrogance, and he had to dwell out in the fields with the beast. With the beast, you remember. Jesus said, Luke 17 verse 4, if your brother sins against you 7 times in a day, to forgive him. Interesting that statement, because on another occasion, Peter asked Jesus how many times that he should forgive his brother, and Peter volunteered 7 times, but Jesus said no, 70 times, 7 times. But on this occasion, in Luke 17 verse 4, didn't do that. Jesus just volunteered 7 times. He didn't say 70 times 7, but he did say 7 times in a day, which is interesting because I think when I was sharing on this recently, I said when Peter says, 7 times, did he mean in a day or a month or a year or a lifetime? What did he mean? Well, Jesus there in Luke says in a day, 7 times in a day. In Revelation, you got 7 lampstands, you got 7 churches, you got 7 spirits. You got 7 angels, you got 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 thunders, 7 plagues, 7 vials. The 7, 7, 7, 7. And it has been said that 7 sort of represents the perfect, the complete number, like a completion in Bible numerics. And I know that it has been believed by many, including myself, that the 7th millennium of human history will be the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. But of course, we thought that with the turn of this century, which has ushered in the 7th millennium, that Jesus would have returned before the turn of the 21st century, and he didn't, and we're 24 years into it now. But on reflection, I think that the 6 millenniums, which represent the 6 working or period of labour, would start not when Adam was first created, but when sin entered into the world. And we don't know when that was. I mean, the Genesis record could easily be read to mean it happened pretty well straight away, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. It might have been, who knows? It might have been quite a few years before God actually, put that test to them, and where sin entered in the world. But I do believe that the six millenniums would be counted from when sin entered into the world. But the signs today certainly indicate we're on the last lap.
Yeah.
There's not really a lot that needs to be done to complete the cycle.
It's interesting, Barry, and we've sort of discussed this before, but just for the record, the Jews reckon that where we're at now, like in 2024, is the year 5,784 from the beginning.
Yeah.
So we're not the only sort of weirdos saying that the whole of human history is 6,000 years and the 7th millennium is just around the corner.
No.
Now how they get that, it's very hard to sort of say exactly when you go back that far, but it's within the ballpark.
Yeah.
It's within the ballpark of 6,000 years of history. So whether we're closer than we think or a couple hundred years out, we're definitely getting very close.
So the difference between their calendar and the Gregorian is what, 220
It'd be about
200.
that, yeah.
Well, I tell you what, if they're right, I'd hate to think
What the
what the
world's
world's
gonna
going to be like in
200 years.
220 years,
Yeah.
the way it's going.
That's right.
Hey?
Yeah. So I'm not
Phew.
saying they are right, but it's
No.
interesting that that's the way they
No.
reckon it, which means, you know, in round figures, we are about 6,000 years.
Yeah. And of course, as Jesus said, unless he cut the time short,
Yeah.
and as it was in Noah's day, God did cut the time 20 years short. So there's always that possibility. But it's interesting in Joshua 5, verse 14, Israel, of course, the nation of Israel saw Joshua as the captain of the army. But in reality, he wasn't. Because in Joshua 5, verse 14, prior to walking around Jericho, Joshua saw a man with a sword drawn in his hand. And it was obviously an angel. And Joshua said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" You remember reading that? That is, whose side are you on? And one modern translation renders the angel's answer like this. In answer to the question, whose side are you on? He said, "Neither. But as captain of the Lord's army, I have now come." That is, I haven't come to take sides. I've come to take over.
Yeah.
That's really what the angel was saying. I've come to take over. I'm the captain here, not you, Joshua. I'm in charge here, and this angel obviously had charge of the earthquake and the falling of the walls and all that. So the important thing is, it's not so much whose side the Lord is on, but whose side we're on. Eh? And it's the Lord's battle, not ours. And it reminds me of an occasion earlier on in the wilderness in Exodus 32, the golden calf episode, where Moses stood in the entrance to the camp and he said, "Who's on the Lord's side?" You remember that? Who's on the Lord's side? And the sons of Levi responded. And it always amazes me. There was only them. Only the sons of Levi responded. And they ended up girding their swords and going through the camp and slaying their own brethren who had all fallen prey to this idolatrous worship of the golden calf. But you might remember we sing that redemption hymn, "Who was on the Lord's side?" And that's where it's actually taken from. But one of the lessons, the practical lessons that we get from all this is that here they are walking around this city wall 6 times and nothing happened. And you can relate that to experiences that we as Christians can have. Sometimes we can be in predicaments where there's like these high walls that are blocking the way and creating, the problems for us. And we're waiting on the Lord, and we're having the full assurance that the Lord's on our side, and we're being obedient to what He wants to do, but nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. And just having to be patient and just having to be obedient, just carry on doing what the Lord has told you to do, foolish as it might sometimes seem to be, but at the end of the day, the Lord always comes out the victor, and that's what He did, because these people were obedient. Although nothing was happening for a while, in the end, it happened big time, really big time. Sometimes we can be making a big effort. And it was quite an effort walking around that city like they did, and nothing happens. But the Lord does have His time, and He does have His way. When I read about these 7 trumpets, it reminds you, like in the book of Revelation, there's a reference to 7 trumpets. And the 7 trumpets each announce events. They're all, I believe, end time events, and there is a series of them. And when the 7th trumpet sounds, then it says the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever. That was the climax, the 7th trumpet. And we do read later in Revelation 16 about the 7th vial, that is the 7th bowl of wrath. And again, there is this series of bowls of wrath. And when the 7th bowl of wrath is poured out, which you can line up with the 7th trumpet period, there was this earthquake of unprecedented magnitude, causing all the cities of the nations to fall over and collapse. And I believe that the walls of Jericho falling over and the city collapsing when the 7th trumpet, the 7 trumpets sounded, was pointing forward. Because God, who knows the end from the beginning, he knew that he was going to give a revelation through his son to give to the church, and there would be a reference to 7 trumpets in it. And it's amazing to think, really, that God may have deliberately set up this whole campaign, this whole walking around the city 7 times and the 7 trumpets and that, purely as a foreshadow of the great climactic judgments of God in the end time, when the Joshua is going to come and the kingdoms of this world are going to become his. It's just a thought, you know, but we know there's a lot more often in these appointments of God in the Old Testament, especially in relation to Israel, than what sometimes meets the eye.
It was obviously a test as well, wasn't it, for the Israelites, as well as you said, playing mind games with the unbelieving town of Jericho, albeit giving them the opportunity.
That's right.
God received Rahab.
Yep.
They didn't have to die. They just needed to surrender, bow their knee to the God of Israel, like Rahab did. She was saved. But as well as that, it was obviously a test to the Israelites themselves as well, because we know under Moses a mixed multitude came out. They caused all sorts of problems, in the days of Moses. Not a lot has changed.
No.
It's a new generation, but not a lot's changed. And we know that there were sort of faithless sort of people when we read not long after this with Achan, stealing part of the booty and hiding it, when they weren't supposed to, and what happened to him and those who supported him. So, it was also a sign, wasn't it, to the Israelites themselves that, hey, you got to believe when I say these things, and it might look stupid, but you got to believe. And when you see it happen, you should really believe.
Right.
So, very much God was doing more than just one thing with this whole account, wasn't it?
Yeah. I wonder, you're mentioning about the mixed multitude. I'm assuming that they were Egyptians, that there were Egyptians who were sort of impressed by the judgments of God and the humbling of Egypt, and who came out. I wonder, does it ever actually specifically say that it was them in particular who had the hankering to set up the golden calf idol?
I don't think so, but it's sort of a reasonable assumption.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
I think, because they weren't spiritual. They didn't have
No,
the history.
Israel, I don't think there's any record of Israel ever worshipping golden calves when they were slaves in Egypt. But these Egyptians would have.
Yeah.
They would have been, and which only just goes to show you the danger of allowing a mixed multitude in the church, because that's what Israel was. Israel was the Old Covenant, the Old Testament church. And by allowing these people come into the church, who were basically idolaters, major problem. It actually resulted in that whole generation not getting into the promised land.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually prevented that generation of Israelites to not get into the promised land, which only goes, it's just one of many, many examples. It goes to show how guarded we have to be in the Lord's church as to, you know, who you let in. And I mean, that might sound a bit over the top about who you let in, considering that it's the Lord that calls and all that. But He has given us a responsibility, and He did actually say that whatever you, what was the word? Bind. I was thinking a seal. It's bind, wasn't it? Whatever you bind, will be, and whatever you loose will be loose. And it's obviously a huge responsibility, but there are standards. Yeah, there are standards.
And we're going to see that in the next verse, aren't we, with Rahab? And
Yeah.
of course, Ruth is a similar example. But when you look at Ruth's declaration, you know, your God shall be my
Right.
God, your people shall be my people. She's the one you let in.
Yeah.
And she's the one that the Lord was happy to make a part of his Messiah's genealogy.
Yeah.
And so you're right, that there has to be that declaration and of course that practical living. Whereas sometimes, people can come into not just our church, but any church, but with their own agendas,
Right.
with their own little pet doctrines, their own little beliefs, and you know they're not actually bowing to the one true God of Israel, the one true God of the Bible, are they? And the
No.
one truth of the Bible. There's not lots of truths,
No.
is there?
That's right. You were asking John before about why Joshua is not mentioned there, where it goes straight from Moses to Rahab. And while you were talking, a thought did cross my mind. I'm not saying this is the reason, but it was a thought that crossed my mind that is it possible that the writer is thinking, well, I've been quoting a lot of men, you know, as examples of faith. Maybe I should throw a woman in. Maybe I should mention a woman in here. I don't really think that is the reason, but it was just a thought that crossed my mind. And whether it was a reason or not, I think it's good that he did.
Yeah.
Because it's not just men who have faith;
Right.
it's women too.
Yeah.
You know, and Rahab was a classic. By faith, the harlot Rahab. Did it have to mention that she was a harlot? But it did. The harlot. Really?
Yeah.
God's using harlots, you know, to make the way easier for His people. The harlot Rahab perished not with those who believed not. The record, of course, is in Joshua chapter 2, and we know from the record she believed in the God of Israel and His power and the victory that He would grant, which couldn't be seen. It wasn't a foregone conclusion, but that's what faith is.
Yeah.
Faith is conviction of things not seen. But it was not a faith not based on something, because she was aware, as were all the other inhabitants of Jericho, she was aware of what God had done. She was aware of His ability, you know.
And she reasoned.
Yeah,
She took on board what
Exactly.
she heard
Yeah.
and made a choice.
which was more than what a lot of the Israelites in the past had done.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, she's reasoning, oh, you know, I've heard about what happened to the Egyptians. I've heard about the dividing of the Red Sea, you know, and all those things that happened. On that basis, I believe.
Yeah.
I believe that their God is a real God, and that He's going to have the victory over our city. But the Israelites, most of the Israelites, couldn't even reason like that, could they? No. Yeah. So that's an amazing thing.
And she wasn't making excuses.
No.
You know, she was just,
No.
I've got to get on board with this, otherwise I'm going to suffer.
That's right.
It's funny, Barry, you made a point of her being a harlot. I've sort of read it before, and I noticed on our eSword with Adam Clark's commentary. I don't know if you were going to mention it or not, but he says, when we translate this harlot, it should be rendered innkeeper or tavern keeper. It's just an idle fancy, a figment of an idle fancy that she was a harlot. After all, she married Salmon, a Jewish prince, and he wouldn't have sought for such an alliance to marry a harlot. For goodness sake, like the Greek word translated harlot is porne, from which we get pornographic.
That's right.
And elsewhere in Scripture, that same word is used of whores, harlots. Revelation 17, the mother of harlots.
Yeah.
And if you go back into the Joshua account that you just referred to, it's exactly the same. The Hebrew word translated that she was a harlot, if you track it through how it's used, is exactly the same. It means a prostitute, a whore, a harlot.
Right.
So, it's really, Adam Clark is trying to sanitize sinners who get converted.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
No.
Sinners who get converted are sinners.
That's
They
right.
might be murderers, they might be harlots, they might be thieves.
Yeah.
Who cares? God doesn't.
No.
And when they get converted, though, like Rahab did, it matters not,
No.
does it, anymore?
Of course.
So, really disappointing, I reckon, he goes down that track.
Yeah. But prior to Joshua leading his army on the march around the Jericho, as we know, he sent 2 spies out to spy out the situation pertaining to Jericho, and they ended up staying at the harlot's house, at Rahab's house. We're not told exactly how they got to be at her house, doesn't really matter, but I would say it was providential.
Providential,
Yeah, absolutely. She might have been, well, in fact, she and her family were the only ones in the whole city that actually qualified to be saved, to be delivered. But Hebrews 11 verse 31 says, she received them with peace. That's, is it Hebrews 11 verse 31?
Yep.
Received them with, she received them with peace. That is, she gave them a kind, cordial welcome. She was very hospitable towards them. She felt completely at ease with them, and I imagine that would have made them feel completely at ease with her. I don't think it would have taken them long to know where she stood because of what she said. There's no guessing game involved in this. Well, anyway, as you know, the king of Jericho got word of this, and he sent soldiers to make Rahab turn these Israelite spies over. But she'd hidden them, and she told the messengers or the soldiers that, they were here, but they've gone. They've left. And after the soldiers left and the city gate was locked, I'll read it to you in Joshua. She said to the men, I know the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings, the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I've dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. And it shall come about, when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. so that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, "Go to the hill country, lest the pursuers happen upon you. Hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way." Notice these detailed instructions she's giving them, you know.
Sounds like she's hidden some people before, Barry.
Yeah.
A little bit of an expert.
Yeah. And the men said to her, "We shall be free from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless, when we come into the land, you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself to the house your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. And it shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear." And she said, "According to your words, so be it." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. And as we know, Rahab and her house were saved. When the city walls fell, obviously her house, which was part of the city wall, was spared. Some have suggested that her house might have been in the corner, not that we have to make special provisions for the Lord, you know, to save a piece of the wall, but it's quite possible that you know the walls are falling. You could imagine that corner section maybe not falling, and of it standing upright there. But being a Gentile, Rahab's example of faith was really quite unique at the time, you know, when you think of it, but a foreshadow of things to come when the Gentiles would be properly called. And as you mentioned, John, the same applies to Ruth. Both of them, in fact, became part of the important ancestral line of David. And I think at that point we might stop. But it's a great story. Yeah, it's a great story.
Will we be coming back to Rahab next time, Barry?
Yeah.
Yep, cool.